Insufferable drama queen Samantha Hale had a way of making everyone notice her the moment she entered a room. She was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried herself with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. In the quiet town of Maplewood, she was both admired and envied. People whispered about her sense of style, her charm, and the way she could command attention without even trying. On the surface, Samantha appeared to live a perfect life, a modern, luxurious home at the edge of town, an impressive social calendar, and friends who seemed eager to be seen with her. She had an uncanny ability to make ordinary events feel extraordinary, turning even a simple dinner into a spectacle. But behind the glittering facade, there was a side of her that few dared to confront, a side that grew bolder as time went on. Those closest to Samantha began to notice cracks in the image she presented to the world. She was demanding, manipulative, and often seemed to measure her worth by the attention she received. Friends described moments when her charm would vanish, replaced by sharp words or cold indifference. She had little patience for anyone who disagreed with her or challenged her authority, often twisting situations so that she appeared to be the victim, even when she was clearly at fault. Her social media accounts were meticulously curated, portraying a life of elegance and excitement, but those who observed closely could detect a pattern of exaggeration and selective storytelling. Samantha thrived on admiration, but it was never enough. She needed constant validation, a spotlight that never dimmed. Even within the town, Samantha's behavior started to unsettle people. Small incidents began to accumulate favoritism in local committees, subtle threats to those who questioned her, and an insistence that rules did not apply to her. Business owners reported unusual encounters, demands for special treatment, insinuations that refusing her requests would bring social consequences. At first, many dismissed these incidents as quirks of her dramatic personality, believing that her charm would smooth over any friction. But as the months passed, it became increasingly clear that Samantha's sense of entitlement was growing, unchecked and unapologetic. Her actions, once considered harmless eccentricity, began to strain relationships and generate tension in a town that had always valued harmony. Samantha's gatherings became the stage for her influence, places where she could assert control and bask in admiration. She hosted extravagant parties where everything from the music to the lighting was perfectly orchestrated to highlight her presence. Guests often left feeling impressed but also uneasy, sensing the subtle pressure to cater to her whims. Behind the glitter and laughter, Samantha monitored every interaction, noting who gave her attention and who dared to question her. These events were not just social occasions. They were exercises in power, opportunities to reinforce her belief that she was untouchable. People began to talk quietly about her manipulations, but few were willing to confront her directly, fearful of becoming the next target of her sharp tongue or calculated schemes. Despite the growing unease, Samantha remained charming and persuasive, capable of convincing even the skeptical that she was misunderstood. She had a way of twisting narratives, framing herself as the misunderstood hero of her own story, and many found themselves caught between admiration and caution. Those who tried to resist or challenge her often found themselves isolated or subtly discredited. By the time the town began to grasp the depth of her manipulation, Samantha had already woven a web of influence that was difficult to untangle. Her reputation as a drama queen who believed she was above the rules was no longer just gossip, it was becoming a troubling reality, setting the stage for events that would shock the entire community. The small incidents that once seemed harmless soon escalated into a pattern that made it clear Samantha Hale was no ordinary drama queen. What had started as exaggerations and attention-seeking behavior developed into something more serious, a consistent disregard for rules, boundaries, and the consequences of her actions. It began with minor deceptions and paid bills at local businesses, inflated claims about her achievements, and embellished stories meant to impress anyone who would listen. People initially shrugged these off as harmless quirks, chalking them up to Samantha's larger-than-life personality. but the frequency and audacity of her actions made it impossible to ignore. As time went on, she pushed further, testing the limits of what she could get away with, seemingly confident that the law and social norms did not apply to her. Samantha's influence extended into every corner of Maplewood. Local shopkeepers and restaurant owners reported incidents in which she demanded special treatment or attempted to manipulate situations to her advantage. A simple request could quickly turn into a high-pressure demand, and those who resisted found themselves subtly threatened or publicly embarrassed. At town meetings, she inserted herself into discussions, ensuring her opinions dominated and that anyone who opposed her was cast in a negative light. Friends and acquaintances began noticing a pattern. Samantha would charm those who could help her, intimidate those who opposed her, and erase anyone who threatened her carefully crafted image. Her behavior was calculated, and she seemed to enjoy the quiet control she held over the people around her. One event in particular began to signal that Samantha's antics were moving beyond social manipulation into real danger. A minor accident occurred at a community fundraiser she had helped organize. Supplies were improperly stored, and a small fire broke out in a corner of the venue. While no one was seriously hurt, Samantha immediately shifted blame onto the staff and volunteers, insisting that the chaos had nothing to do with her instructions. Her attempts to rewrite the story were effective at first, convincing some that she was simply a victim of circumstance. However, closer observers began to note the recurring pattern of recklessness and self-preservation. People started to wonder whether she truly saw the consequences of her actions or if she believed herself untouchable. Samantha's growing arrogance extended to her personal relationships as well. Friends reported instances where she manipulated others into covering for her mistakes, creating false accounts or exaggerating problems to elicit sympathy. Any attempt to confront her or question her behavior was met with charm, excuses, or outright hostility. Her influence was subtle but pervasive, leaving many unsure whether they were acting on their own judgment or simply following the path she had laid out for them. By this point, her behavior was no longer just dramatic, it was dangerous. Even strangers in town began to take notice. People who had only interacted with Samantha briefly described her as forceful and unpredictable. Rumors circulated about her entitlement, her ability to bend rules, and her growing disregard for anyone who got in her way. While some dismissed these stories as gossip, they contributed to a growing unease in Maplewood. Samantha's behavior was no longer just a private matter. It was spilling into public spaces, affecting businesses, families, and the social fabric of the town. The sense of inevitability grew if Samantha continued unchecked. Her recklessness would eventually lead to a crisis that could not be ignored. The night of the party was meant to be Samantha Hale's crowning achievement, a display of glamour and influence that would solidify her status as the town's most admired socialite. The mansion gleamed with lights, the garden was transformed into an extravagant scene of luxury, and the guest list included the town's elite. Samantha moved through the crowd with practiced ease, ensuring every conversation, every laugh, every glance reinforced her dominance. But beneath the glittering surface, tension had been quietly building. The preparations for the evening had been rushed and careless, with electrical wiring stretched beyond safe limits and flammable decorations scattered throughout the rooms. Few noticed these dangers amid the spectacle, and even fewer questioned them. As the night progressed, Samantha's focus remained on maintaining the perfect image. She flitted from one group to another, orchestrating laughter and praise, while staff scurried to meet every whim. Drinks flowed freely, music pulsed through the rooms, and the atmosphere was intoxicating. Then, without warning, the accident occurred. A small spark in the kitchen, likely from overloaded electrical cords, ignited a stack of flammable decorations. Within minutes, the fire spread and panic erupted. Guests scrambled for exits, some suffering minor injuries, while others froze, unsure where to turn. The glamour of the evening vanished, replaced by smoke, shouting, and chaos. Samantha, however, instinctively attempted to control the narrative even in the midst of danger. She directed staff and guests, insisting the situation was under control, all while trying to shield herself from blame. Investigators who arrived at the mansion soon realized that the fire was not merely an accident. Negligence played a central role, safety protocols had been ignored, warnings overlooked, and Samantha's insistence on extravagance had created the conditions for disaster. Witnesses reported seeing her handle flammable materials carelessly, moving decorations and lighting without concern for safety. While she had always thrived on attention and drama, this event revealed a reckless disregard for the well-being of others, elevating her actions from reckless indulgence to criminal negligence. The town, which had long whispered about her antics, could no longer deny the seriousness of the situation. In the aftermath, Samantha attempted to manipulate the story, portraying herself as a victim caught in an unfortunate chain of events. She emphasized her concern for guests and her efforts to help, downplaying the choices that had led to the fire. Friends and neighbors, however, began to share details of her previous reckless behavior, creating a narrative that could not be ignored. Each account painted a picture of someone who had consistently flouted rules, manipulated situations, and placed her own desires above the safety of others. The fire became a turning point in Samantha's life, exposing the depth of her entitlement and the real-world consequences of her actions. It was no longer possible for the town to view her as merely dramatic or eccentric. The incident forced authorities, friends, and neighbors alike to confront the truth. Samantha Hale's behavior had escalated beyond social manipulation into actions that endangered lives. The sparkling image she had so carefully cultivated began to crumble, revealing a dangerous pattern of recklessness and arrogance. The town had always suspected she thought herself above the law, but now they had undeniable proof. What had been gossip, speculation, and uneasy whispers transformed into a tangible reality, a reality that would change Maplewood forever. The aftermath of the fire left Maplewood in shock, and the town quickly realized that Samantha Hale's behavior extended far beyond one reckless night. As investigators delved deeper, a web of manipulation, deceit, and intimidation began to unravel. Friends and acquaintances came forward with stories that had long been whispered but never confirmed. They described a pattern of coercion, falsehoods, and strategic charm that allowed Samantha to bend people to her will. Some revealed instances in which she had threatened personal or professional harm to maintain control, while others spoke of her ability to turn minor mistakes into crises for those around her. Each account added layers to the growing image of a woman whose entitlement knew no bounds. The investigation revealed that Samantha had meticulously covered her tracks. Documents were forged, messages deleted, and witnesses subtly pressured into silence. Even the staff who had been present during the fire admitted that they had felt intimidated, unsure whether speaking the truth would result in personal repercussions. Social media, which had once been Samantha's stage, now amplified the controversy. Videos of the fire circulated alongside commentary from friends and townspeople, exposing her reckless behavior to a wider audience. The narrative shifted from fascination with her personality to concern about her disregard for others and the consequences of her actions. As the story spread, the town experienced a mix of fear and fascination. People who had previously admired Samantha now wondered if they had been complicit in her schemes, unknowingly enabling her sense of invincibility. Local businesses recounted earlier encounters in which she had manipulated situations for personal gain, from undue discounts to special privileges. Each new revelation painted a more alarming picture. Samantha's charm was not harmless flair. It was a calculated tool she used to dominate and control. Neighbors who had once tolerated her antics grew wary, and families began to advise caution when interacting with her. The tension in Maplewood was palpable as people realized that her influence had reached further than they had imagined. Public scrutiny increased as legal authorities began formal proceedings. Court records detail the extent of Samantha's negligence and manipulations, exposing long-standing patterns that the town had only glimpsed. Every hearing brought new testimonies from witnesses who described her relentless pursuit of attention and power. The courtroom became a stage where Samantha's carefully constructed persona began to unravel. Those who had once been intimidated by her now spoke openly, revealing the truth behind the image she had projected for so long. What had seemed like isolated incidents were, in fact, part of a larger story of entitlement and recklessness. Behind the public drama, Samantha herself began to show cracks in her composure. While she continued to present a confident front, reports suggested that the pressure of mounting evidence and public scrutiny weighed heavily on her. The web of lies and manipulations that had sustained her power for years was collapsing. Maplewood watched as the woman who had once dominated social gatherings and commanded admiration now faced the reality of her actions. The town's fascination with her drama shifted to a sense of relief, a recognition that the influence she wielded so recklessly could no longer harm others unchecked. The fire, initially seen as a shocking accident, had ignited far more than flames. It had exposed the truth about Samantha Hale, her arrogance, and the danger of believing oneself above the law. The courtroom was tense the day Samantha Hale finally faced judgment. Months of investigations, witness statements, and mounting evidence had led to this moment, and the town of Maplewood waited with bated breath. What had begun as a dramatic display of charm and glamour had transformed into a story of recklessness, manipulation, and disregard for the safety of others. As prosecutors laid out their case, the full extent of Samantha's actions became undeniable. From her repeated negligence with flammable materials to the patterns of intimidation and deception that had characterized her life, the evidence painted a clear picture. Samantha had consistently acted as though rules and consequences did not apply to her. Witnesses recounted incidents that went beyond the fire, describing years of manipulation and coercion. Former friends testified to the psychological toll of her behavior, detailing how she had twisted situations to maintain control and protect her image. Business owners described being pressured into providing special treatment, with subtle threats lurking behind her polite veneer. Staff members who had been present during the mansion fire spoke of the fear and confusion she had caused, emphasizing the danger of her recklessness. Each account added weight to the case, leaving little room for doubt that Samantha's behavior had crossed from selfish drama into criminal negligence. The trial revealed the depth of Samantha's obsession with appearances. She had invested so much in crafting a persona of perfection and influence that she had overlooked the very real consequences of her actions. Legal experts described her conduct as a textbook example of entitlement and recklessness, where personal gain and public image were prioritized over safety and integrity. The courtroom audience could see the contrast between the woman who once dazzled guests at parties and the one now confronted with the consequences of her choices. The power she had wielded over the town had evaporated under the scrutiny of law and testimony, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. When the verdict was finally announced, there was a collective sense of resolution in the room. Samantha Hale was found guilty on multiple counts of negligence and manipulation, and her sentence reflected the severity of her actions. For the first time in years, she was confronted with limits, boundaries, and accountability. The judgment served as a stark reminder that charm, drama, and influence could not override responsibility. Maplewood, which had long tolerated her antics and admired her confidence, now witnessed the fall of a figure who had cast a long shadow over the town. In the weeks following the verdict, the town began to recover from the chaos Samantha had caused. Conversations that once centered on gossip and fascination shifted to reflection and caution. People shared stories not of admiration but of lessons learned about the dangers of unchecked entitlement. Samantha's dramatic flair, once a source of excitement and intrigue, became a cautionary tale. Her story reminded everyone that no amount of charm or confidence could place someone above the law. The fire, the manipulation, and the reckless disregard for others were no longer secrets. and the town of Maplewood slowly returned to a sense of balance, its community strengthened by the awareness that justice, ultimately, could reach even those who believed themselves untouchable.